Hi and welcome to the Archive of History. Tonight we journey to a place where stone gods rise from the jungle floor, where the air hangs thick with moisture and ancient mystery. Imagine a civilization so vast, so magnificent, that its capital was the largest pre-industrial city in the world. A kingdom where temples reached toward the heavens, where kings were worshipped as living gods, and where an empire of farmers and builders commanded the heart of Southeast Asia for 6 centuries. This is the story of the Khmer Empire, of the sacred city of Angkor, and of a people whose ingenuity allowed them to thrive in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. Before we drift off, I am always curious to know where my listeners are tuning in from and what time it is that they are listening tonight. Let me know in the comments. And now, settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade away. Close your eyes and let us travel back through time. Back through the centuries, to a humid morning in the jungles of Cambodia, to a kingdom that rose from water and returned to green silence. It is just before dawn in the heart of the Cambodian jungle. The darkness is absolute, a thick velvet blackness broken only by the faint silver glow beginning to creep along the eastern horizon. The air is heavy, saturated with moisture. It clings to your skin like a second layer, warm and alive. You can feel it in your lungs with every breath. Thick and sweet, with the scent of wet earth, decaying leaves, and night-blooming flowers whose fragrance drifts through the canopy above. The jungle around you is alive with sound. Insects hum and click in rhythmic waves, their chorus rising and falling like a great breathing organism. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls, a low haunting note that echoes through the trees. Closer, you hear the rustle of leaves, the soft movement of unseen creatures making their way through the undergrowth. The forest floor beneath your feet is soft and yielding, covered in layers of fallen leaves and moss that have accumulated over countless seasons. You are standing at the edge of something immense. You cannot see it yet, but you sense its presence. There is a weight to the air here, a feeling of ancient permanence that presses gently against your awareness. As the sky begins to lighten, the darkness shifts from black to deep indigo, and slowly shapes begin to emerge from the gloom. At first they appear as darker shadows against the dark, angular forms that do not belong to the organic curves of the jungle. Then, as the light grows stronger, you begin to understand what you are seeing. Rising from the forest floor, wrapped in vines and draped in moss, are walls of stone. Not rough natural boulders, but carved blocks, precisely cut and fitted together with such skill that even after centuries of abandonment, they still hold their form. These are the outer walls of a temple, and they stretch away into the darkness on either side of you, disappearing into the jungle as if they have no end. The dawn comes slowly here, not with the sudden brilliance of a sunrise over open land, but with a gradual seeping of light through layers of mist and foliage. The mist is everywhere now, rising from the ground in ghostly ribbons, curling around the base of the stone walls and drifting upward through the trees. It softens everything, turning the world into a dreamscape where solid stone seems to float weightless in the humid air. As the light strengthens, you see more clearly the enormity of what surrounds you. The walls before you are not the walls of a single building, but the beginning of a complex, a vast architectural creation that extends far beyond what you can see. Above the walls, through the gaps in the canopy, you catch glimpses of towers. They rise in tiered layers, each level slightly smaller than the one below, creating a mountain-like silhouette against the lightening sky. The towers are carved with such detail that even from this distance, you can see the intricate patterns covering every surface, the stone transformed into a tapestry of images and symbols. This is Angkor. This is the heart of the Khmer Empire. This is a place where for 600 years, a civilization flourished with a sophistication and scale that rivaled anything in the medieval world. What you are seeing is only one temple, one monument among hundreds that once filled this valley. At its height, the city that surrounded these temples was home to perhaps 1 million people, their wooden houses and markets and palaces all gone now, reclaimed by the jungle, leaving only the stone temples to mark where they once thrived. As the sun finally breaks through the canopy, shafts of golden light pierce the mist, illuminating particles of moisture in the air until they seem to glow. The light falls upon the temple walls, and for the first time you see the full glory of the carvings. Every inch of stone is decorated. There are gods and demons frozen in eternal battle, their faces serene despite the violence of their poses. There are dancers, their bodies curved in impossible grace, their hands held in precise gestures that once held meaning to those who worshipped here. There are elephants and horses, chariots and warriors, all rendered with such life and energy that they seem ready to step free from the stone that holds them. The morning sounds of the jungle are changing now, as the nocturnal creatures retreat to their hidden places. The day animals are beginning to stir. You hear the call of hornbills, their distinctive cry echoing through the trees. There is a rustling high above as monkeys move through the canopy, their dark shapes silhouetted against the patches of brightening sky. The air is beginning to warm, the coolness of night burning away as the sun climbs higher. Already you can feel the promise of the heat that will come, the thick oppressive warmth that defines this place for much of the year. But for now, in these early hours, there is a gentleness to the morning, a quiet beauty that makes this place feel sacred even without understanding its history. You move closer to the temple entrance, your footsteps muffled by the soft carpet of leaves. As you approach, you see that the threshold is flanked by stone guardians, massive sculptures of mythical beings whose eyes seem to watch your approach. Their faces are weathered by centuries of rain and wind, softened by moss and lichen, but their presence is still commanding, still protective of the sacred space they guard. Crossing the threshold, you step from the wild jungle into a different kind of space. The temple's outer galleries stretch away on either side. Long corridors open to the air but shaded by the stone roof above. The floor beneath your feet is smooth, worn by countless footsteps over countless years. Here, the carvings are even more intricate. The walls are not merely decorated, they are transformed into entire narratives carved in relief. Scenes from ancient epics unfold across the stone, stories of gods and heroes, of cosmic battles and divine victories. You see depictions of the churning of the ocean of milk, the great creation myth where gods and demons cooperate to churn the cosmic sea, seeking the elixir of immortality. The figures move across the wall in a flowing procession, their expressions focused and determined as they work the great serpent that serves as their churning rope. The serpent itself is massive, its scaled body wrapping around the central mountain, its multiple heads rearing back in effort. Every scale is carved with precision, every face in the crowd of divine beings given individual character and expression. This is not merely decoration, this is scripture written in stone, this is cosmology made visible, tangible, eternal. The people who built this place did so with a purpose that went far beyond creating shelter or even creating beauty. They were building a model of the universe itself, a sacred space where the earthly realm and the divine realm could touch, where a mortal king could transform into a god, where the ordinary flow of time could be transcended. As you walk deeper into the temple complex, the morning light filtering through openings in the stone creates patterns of brightness and shadow that shift as the sun moves. The mist is beginning to thin now, burning away in the growing heat, but it still clings to the coolest corners, still drifts through the courtyards and chambers like the spirits of those who once walked these halls. You can almost hear them. The priests chanting their morning prayers, the attendants sweeping the floors, the pilgrims bringing offerings of flowers and incense to the shrines. You can almost smell the sandalwood smoke, the jasmine blossoms, the perfumed oils. This place was once alive with ritual and devotion, with ceremony and belief. Now it is silent, but the silence itself feels reverent, as if the stones remember what they witnessed and hold that memory in their stillness. The Khmer Empire. The name itself evokes images of jungle-covered ruins and mysterious stone faces, but the reality was far more complex and far more human than the romantic myths suggest. This was a real civilization with real people, a society that developed sophisticated systems of government, religion, agriculture, and art. It was a place where farmers and craftsmen, soldiers and merchants, priests and kings all played their part in creating something remarkable. To understand this empire, to truly feel what it meant to live in its shadow and under its protection, we must journey back to its beginning, back to the moment when one man decided to unite the warring kingdoms of the region and forge them into something new. We must travel back to the year 802 AD, to a sacred mountain in the heart of Cambodia, to the moment when Jayavarman II declared himself not just a king but a god king, and in doing so, laid the foundation for 6 centuries of Khmer dominance. This is where our story truly begins. The year is 802 AD, and you are standing on the slopes of Phnom Kulen, a mountain plateau northeast of what will one day become Angkor. The landscape here is different from the flat plains below. The ground rises in gentle hills covered in dense forest, and from the higher elevations, you can see for miles across the jungle canopy that stretches to the horizon in every direction. This is a place of spiritual power, a sacred mountain where the earth touches the sky and where the gods are said to dwell. You are here because something momentous is about to happen, something that will change the course of history for this entire region. The air is thick with incense smoke, the fragrant clouds drifting upward from hundreds of small fires that burn before temporary shrines erected for this occasion. All around you, people have gathered. They are dressed in their finest clothes, lengths of silk wrapped around their bodies in intricate folds, jewelry of gold and precious stones glinting in the sunlight that filters through the trees. These are the nobles and chiefs of the various kingdoms and territories that make up this fractured land, all of them here at the command of one man. That man is Jayavarman II. He stands at the center of the ceremony, tall and dignified, his face composed in an expression of serene authority. He is not a young man, but neither is he old. He has spent years preparing for this moment, years consolidating power through military conquest and diplomatic alliance, years building the network of supporters who now surround him. But military power alone is not enough. In this world where kings are expected to be more than mere men, where rulers must bridge the gap between heaven and earth, something more is needed. Jayavarman understands this. He understands that to truly unite these warring territories, to create something that will last beyond his own lifetime, he must transform himself from a mortal king into something divine. This ceremony, conducted by the most powerful Brahmin priests in the land, is designed to do exactly that. It is the ritual of the Devaraja, the God King, a concept that will become the foundation of Khmer kingship for centuries to come. The priests are chanting now, their voices rising and falling in Sanskrit verses that most of those present do not understand but all recognize as sacred. The language itself is holy, the words of the gods, and the priests who speak it are the intermediaries between the human and divine worlds. They have prepared for this ceremony with days of purification, fasting and meditation to make themselves fit vessels for the divine power they are about to invoke. The central priest, an elderly man whose shaved head gleams in the dappled sunlight, stands before a sacred fire. The flames leap and dance as he pours offerings of ghee and grains into them, each offering accompanied by precise mantras and gestures. The smoke rises thick and heavy, carrying the offerings upward to the realm of the gods. Around the fire, a series of elaborate diagrams have been drawn on the ground in colored powders, geometric patterns that represent the cosmic order, the structure of the universe itself. These mandalas are temporary, destined to be swept away after the ceremony, but while they exist, they transform this mountaintop into a sacred space, a point where the boundaries between worlds grow thin. Jayavarman steps forward. He has removed his outer garments and stands now in simple white cloth, the color of purity. Despite his power and his years of military campaigning, he appears humble before the sacred fire, before the priests, before the gods themselves. This humility is crucial. He is not claiming to be a god through his own power. He is offering himself as a vessel, asking the gods to descend into him, to make their home in his mortal form. The head priest begins to anoint him, touching perfumed oils to his forehead, his chest, his hands. Each touch is accompanied by prayers and mantras, invocations to Shiva, the great god of destruction and transformation, asking him to accept this king as his earthly representative. In the Khmer understanding, which blends Hindu and indigenous beliefs into something unique to this place, the king will become the living embodiment of the god. He will be Shiva made flesh, ruling not by mortal authority but by divine right. The ceremony continues for hours. The sun climbs higher, the heat becomes oppressive, but no one moves. To leave would be unthinkable, both a political and spiritual offense. You watch as offerings are made, as prayers are chanted, as complex rituals are performed with exacting precision. The priests pour sacred water over Jayavarman's head, water that has been specially consecrated, water from sacred rivers carried hundreds of miles for this purpose. They drape him in new garments, rich silk the color of saffron, and place upon his head a golden crown so heavy with jewels and elaborate metalwork that it must take strength to bear its weight. But Jayavarman stands straight, his expression unchanged, radiating an aura of calm certainty. He has been transformed. Where before there stood a mortal king, powerful but ultimately human, now there stands a Devaraja, a god king, whose authority comes not from military might or political alliance, but from heaven itself. When the ceremony finally concludes, when the last mantras have been chanted and the last offerings made, Jayavarman turns to face the assembled nobles and chiefs. He does not speak immediately. He lets the silence stretch out, lets them take in what they have witnessed, lets the full weight of what has just occurred settle over them. When he does speak, his voice is clear and commanding, pitched to carry across the gathering. He declares that the land will no longer be divided. He declares that all of Cambodia will be united under one ruler, one divine king, whose authority is absolute, because it comes from the gods themselves. He declares the founding of a new political entity, one that will eventually be known as the Khmer Empire. And he declares that there will be a capital, a great city that will serve as the earthly reflection of the cosmic order, a city that will be built in the plains below this sacred mountain, a city that will eventually be known as Angkor. The declaration is met with acceptance, though whether that acceptance comes from genuine belief, from fear of Jayavarman's military power, or from political calculation varies among those present, but it does not matter. What matters is that they accept, that they bow before this newly transformed God-King, that they pledge their loyalty to his rule. The concept of the Devaraja, of divine kingship, provides a solution to a fundamental political problem. In a world of competing chiefs and petty kings, where personal loyalty and military strength are the only sources of authority, power is always unstable, always contested. But if the king is a god, then to rebel against him is not just political treason but cosmic blasphemy. It is to set yourself against the natural order of the universe itself. This belief, whether genuine or merely politic, will provide a remarkable degree of stability to the Khmer state. It will allow for massive mobilization of labor, for the creation of public works on a scale that would be impossible in a less centralized system. It will justify the extreme hierarchy of Khmer society and provide legitimacy to the rule of successive kings. In the years that followed Jayavarman II's coronation, the work of building the empire begins in earnest. The scattered territories that acknowledged his authority must be more firmly bound together. Infrastructure must be created, roads and bridges connecting different regions, allowing for the movement of armies, officials and trade goods. A bureaucracy must be established, officials appointed to collect taxes, administer justice, and oversee public works. And most importantly, the capital must be built. The plains south of Phnom Kulen are chosen for this purpose. It is a landscape that seems unpromising at first glance, flat and prone to flooding during the monsoon season. But it has advantages that the Khmer engineers recognize immediately. The land is well watered by the Siem Reap River, which flows down from the Kulen Mountains. The soil is fertile, enriched by the annual floods. And most importantly, there is space, vast stretches of relatively flat land perfect for the kind of monumental city building that Jayavarman envisions. The first structures are modest, wooden palaces and temples that leave little trace for archaeologists to find centuries later. But the location is established. This will be the center of the Khmer world. Subsequent kings will build upon the foundation laid by Jayavarman II, each one adding their own temples and reservoirs, expanding and elaborating the sacred landscape. The city that emerges over the next centuries is unlike anything else in the medieval world. It is not a city in the European sense with dense clusters of buildings surrounded by defensive walls. Instead, it is a dispersed urban landscape, a vast area dotted with temple complexes and connected by a sophisticated system of roads, canals, and reservoirs. The ordinary people, the farmers and craftsmen who make up the vast majority of the population, live in wooden houses built on stilts to protect them from flooding. These houses cluster around the temple complexes and along the roads and waterways, forming neighborhoods and communities. But there are no city walls, no clear boundary between urban and rural. The city simply fades gradually into the surrounding countryside, a sign of confidence in the empire's power. As you walk through this early Angkor, you begin to understand the scale of the Khmer vision. This is not just a capital city. It is a sacred landscape, a recreation of the cosmos itself in earthly form. Every temple represents Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain at the center of the universe in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. Every reservoir, called a barrage, represents the cosmic ocean that surrounds Mount Meru. The layout of the city, the orientation of the temples, the placement of the roads and canals, all of it is carefully planned according to religious and astronomical principles. To live in Angkor is to live in the universe itself, to walk daily through a landscape that mirrors the divine realm. This is the genius of the Khmer builders, their ability to transform religious concepts into physical reality, to create a city that is also a mandala, a tool for meditation and spiritual transformation. And at the center of it all, both literally and symbolically, stands the king, the God King, the living embodiment of divine authority, whose palace and whose presence sanctifies the entire realm. You wake before dawn in your wooden house on the outskirts of Angkor. The air is already warm, the coolness of night fleeing quickly as the sun prepares to rise. Your house is modest but comfortable, built on sturdy wooden stilts that raise the living space about 6 feet above the ground. This elevation serves multiple purposes. It protects you from flooding during the monsoon season, when water can cover the land for weeks. It provides storage space beneath the house for tools and supplies. And it allows air to circulate beneath the floor, keeping the interior slightly cooler during the oppressive heat of the day. The walls are woven bamboo, allowing breezes to pass through while still providing privacy and shelter. The roof is thatched with palm leaves, carefully layered and maintained to keep out the rain. It is the same style of house that your parents lived in, and their parents before them, a design that has proven itself over generations in this climate and this landscape. You rise from your sleeping mat, a simple woven reed mat laid directly on the wooden floor. There are no beds in the Western sense, no furniture beyond a few low wooden chests where you keep your possessions. The living area is open and multi-purpose, serving as kitchen, dining room and social space during the day, sleeping area at night. You share this space with your family, your spouse and your children, and during planting or harvest season, sometimes with extended family members who come to help with the work. Privacy is not a concept that exists as it does in other cultures. Life is communal, lived in close quarters with others, and you have never known anything different. You move quietly, trying not to wake the others, and climb down the wooden ladder that serves as the entrance to your home. The ground beneath is still dark, the packed earth cool under your bare feet. You have not worn shoes in weeks. Few people do unless they are wealthy enough to afford them or traveling long distances. Your feet are tough and calloused, capable of walking on any surface without discomfort. The neighborhood is beginning to stir. You can hear similar movements from the other houses nearby, the soft sounds of people rising, the occasional cough or quiet conversation. Your neighbors are people you have known your entire life. You grew up with them. You help each other during planting and harvest. You celebrate festivals together. You mourn together when death visits one of your households. This is your world, these few square miles of land and the people who share them with you. You have heard stories of the great temples and the royal palace at the center of Angkor, but they are distant from your daily life. You have seen them from afar when traveling to market, their towers rising above the trees, but you have never been inside them. Those are places for priests and nobles, not for farmers like you. Your day begins with a journey to the small canal that runs near your home. This canal is part of the vast network of waterways that crisscross the Angkor Plain, a marvel of engineering that you do not fully appreciate because you have never lived anywhere else, never seen a city without such infrastructure. The water in the canal flows clear and steady, drawn from the massive reservoirs called berets that were built by previous kings. You splash water on your face and arms, washing away the sweat and dust of sleep. The water is cool and refreshing, drawn from deep in the earth and filtered through sand and stone on its journey to your canal. Other people from your neighborhood are also here, performing their morning ablutions, exchanging quiet greetings. Women carry ceramic jars balanced on their hips, filling them with water to carry back to their homes for cooking and drinking. Children splash and play in the shallows despite their mother's scolding, their laughter bright in the early morning air. After washing, you return to your house to eat a simple breakfast. Rice. Always rice. It is the foundation of every meal, prepared in large quantities and eaten with whatever vegetables or fish are available. This morning, there is a small portion of dried fish, preserved with salt and pungent enough that only a tiny amount is needed to flavor your rice. Your spouse has already begun preparing the day's food, building up the cooking fire in the clay hearth that sits in one corner of the house. The smoke rises through the thatched roof, which is designed to allow it to escape while still keeping rain out. The smell of wood smoke and cooking rice is the smell of home, comforting and familiar. You eat quickly, using your fingers to shape the sticky rice into small balls that can be dipped in the fish sauce and then popped into your mouth. There is no conversation during the meal. Morning is a time of quiet preparation, saving words for later in the day when the work allows for rest. After breakfast, you gather your tools. You are a farmer, but more specifically, you are a rice farmer. Almost everyone in the kingdom is a rice farmer, in one way or another. Rice is the foundation of Khmer wealth and power. It feeds the population. It provides the surplus that supports the king and his court, the priests and their temples, the soldiers and their campaigns. The rice fields stretch for miles in every direction, a patchwork of flooded paddies that turn bright green during the growing season and golden at harvest. Your tools are simple but effective: a hoe with a wooden handle and an iron blade, sharpened many times and worn smooth with use; a sickle for cutting the rice stalks at harvest; a basket woven from reeds for carrying seedlings or grain. These tools represent a significant investment, especially the iron blade. Iron is valuable, imported from other regions, and worked by skilled blacksmiths. You inherited these tools from your father, and you will pass them to your children when your time comes. The walk to your rice field takes about 20 minutes, following narrow raised paths between the paddies. The paths are just wide enough for one person to walk comfortably, and you must step aside into the mud when you encounter someone coming the other way. The paddies are already flooded, the water standing several inches deep over the black earth. This water comes from the canal system, carefully controlled and distributed according to a complex schedule managed by royal officials. Every farmer knows when their section of paddy will receive water and how long they have before it is redirected to the next section. This system is one of the great achievements of Khmer civilization, though you think of it simply as the way things are and have always been. The water in the paddies is warm, heated by the sun, and teeming with life. Small fish dart through the stalks of rice, eating insects and providing an additional source of protein that you will harvest along with the grain. Frogs croak from the muddy banks. Herons stand motionless in the shallows, their eyes fixed on the water, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Your field is not large, but it is yours. You do not own it in the way that nobles own land. Technically, all land belongs to the king, to the god king, whose authority extends over every inch of the realm. But you have the hereditary right to work this land and to keep a portion of what you grow. The rest goes to the temple or to the royal storehouse as tax. The exact proportion varies from year to year depending on the needs of the kingdom, but it is always significant. You accept this as natural. The king provides order and protection. The temples intercede with the gods on behalf of the people. These services must be paid for. And in years of poor harvest, the king's storehouses will provide emergency supplies to prevent starvation. So the system has its benefits even if it feels burdensome during years of good harvest, when you must give away more than seems fair. Today your task is weeding. The rice plants are growing well, their bright green shoots rising above the water, but so are the weeds. If left unchecked, they will compete with the rice for nutrients and water, reducing your yield. You wade into the paddy, the water rising to mid-calf, the mud soft and sucking beneath your feet. The work is slow and repetitive. You bend at the waist, reach down into the water to feel for the unwelcome plants, pull them up by the roots, and toss them onto the bank where they will wither and die in the sun. Then you take a step forward and repeat the process. Hours pass this way. The sun climbs higher, the heat becomes oppressive. Sweat runs down your back and drips from your nose. Your hands grow raw from the constant immersion in water and mud. Your back begins to ache from the endless bending, but you do not stop. The work must be done, and there is no one else to do it. Around midday you pause to rest. You wade to the bank and sit in the shade of a tree, your feet still dangling in the water. You eat rice wrapped in a banana leaf, brought from home. The rice has gone cold and sticky, but it fills your stomach and gives you energy to continue. Other farmers from neighboring fields are also resting, and there is some quiet conversation, talk of the weather. Always the weather, whether the rains will come on time, whether there will be flooding or drought, whether the harvest will be good or poor. Talk of family, births and deaths, marriages being arranged, disputes between neighbors, and occasionally, talk of news from the capital, rumors and stories that filter down through the social hierarchy. The king is building a new temple, larger than any built before. The king has led the army to war against the Cham people to the east and has returned victorious. These stories seem distant and almost mythical to you, tales from another world that barely touches your own. The afternoon passes much like the morning. more weeding, more bending and pulling and throwing. The sun begins its slow descent toward the western horizon, the heat starting to ease. Finally, as the shadows grow long, you decide you have done enough for one day. You wade out of the paddy and begin the walk home. You are exhausted, your body aching, your hands wrinkled and sore from hours in the water. But there is also a satisfaction in the fatigue.
You have done your work, you have tended your field.
The rice is growing, and if the gods and the weather are kind, in a few months you will harvest it, and your family will have food for another year. This is the rhythm of your life, the cycle that repeats every year, every generation: plant, tend, harvest, and then begin again. As you approach your home, you see smoke rising from the cooking fire. Your spouse has begun preparing the evening meal. Tonight there will be rice again, but also some vegetables from the garden, and perhaps a small amount of fish, if the children were successful in their trapping. You will eat together as a family, sitting on the floor of your house, sharing food from a common pot. After the meal, as darkness falls, and there is no longer enough light to work, you will rest. There might be some conversation, stories told to the children, plans made for the next day, and then you will spread out your sleeping mats and lie down to sleep, knowing that when you wake, the cycle will begin again. This is daily life in the Khmer Empire for the vast majority of the population. It is a life defined by agriculture, by the rhythm of the seasons, by the demands of growing rice in a tropical climate. It is a hard life, and a short one. Few people live beyond their 40s. Disease, accidents, childbirth, and the simple grinding toll of constant labor wear people down. But it is also a life that is part of something larger. The rice you grow feeds not just your family, but the entire kingdom. Now imagine that you are not a farmer, but a stone carver, and your work is of a very different kind. You belong to a specialized class of craftsmen, skilled laborers whose knowledge and artistry are essential to the great building projects that define the Khmer kingdom. You do not work in rice paddies under the sun. Instead, you work in the shade of partially constructed temples, your hands covered not in mud but in stone dust, your tools not hoes and sickles but chisels and hammers. You are one of thousands of workers engaged in the most ambitious architectural project ever attempted in Southeast Asia. You are helping to build Angkor Wat, the temple that will become the crowning achievement of Khmer civilization and one of the most magnificent religious structures ever created by human hands. The construction site is vast, covering an area of over 500 acres. When you first arrive in the early morning, before the sun has fully risen, you are struck again by the sheer scale of what is being attempted here. The outer enclosure wall is already complete, a massive rectangular structure that defines the boundaries of the sacred space. This wall is not merely decorative. It is built from laterite blocks, each one weighing hundreds of pounds, and it stands over 10 feet high. Inside this wall, a moat is being dug, a channel 600 feet wide that will eventually be filled with water to create a symbolic ocean surrounding the temple mountain. Thousands of laborers are working on this moat, digging out the earth and piling it into enormous berms that will form the inner banks. But your work is not with the moat or the outer walls. Your work is with the temple itself, the central structure that rises in the middle of the complex like a mountain reaching toward the heavens. The foundation has been laid, a massive platform of sand and laterite that creates a stable base for the immense weight of stone that will rest upon it. On this foundation, the first level of the temple is taking shape. You work with sandstone, beautiful grey-brown stone that is being brought to the site from quarries nearly 20 miles away. The logistics of this transportation are staggering. The blocks are cut at the quarry to standardized sizes and shapes, then loaded onto rafts and floated down the river during the rainy season when the water level is high enough to allow such heavy cargoes. Each block must then be unloaded and moved into position using wooden rollers, ramps, and the combined strength of dozens of men pulling on ropes. Your specific task is carving. Once the blocks are in place, roughly shaped but still unfinished, you and your fellow carvers transform them into works of art. Every surface of the temple is to be decorated, every wall turned into a canvas for religious and mythological scenes. You work on a section of gallery wall, a long corridor where the interior walls will tell stories from the great Hindu epics. The section assigned to you depicts a scene from the churning of the ocean of milk, the same myth that is carved into temples across Angkor but here rendered on a scale never before attempted. Your section shows the gods on one side of the great serpent Vasuki, pulling on his body to rotate the mountain that churns the cosmic ocean. You begin your work by sketching the outlines directly onto the stone using a piece of chalk or charcoal. The design has been worked out in advance by the master sculptors, artists of supreme skill who create the templates that you and the other carvers follow. Once the outline is sketched, you select your tools. Your chisels are of various sizes and shapes, each one designed for specific tasks. The broad, flat chisel for removing large amounts of stone quickly. The pointed chisel for detail work. The toothed chisel for creating texture. These tools are made from iron, carefully forged and hardened, and they must be sharpened regularly as the stone wears them down quickly. You begin to carve. The work requires intense concentration and a delicate touch despite the strength needed to drive the chisel through the stone. You hold the chisel in your left hand, positioning it exactly where you want to remove stone, and then strike it with a wooden mallet held in your right hand. The sound of mallet on chisel, multiplied by hundreds of carvers working simultaneously across the temple, creates a constant rhythmic music. Each strike removes only a small chip of stone. The figures you are creating emerge slowly from the sandstone, gradually revealing themselves as you work away the excess material surrounding them. The gods in your scene are depicted in profile, standing in rigid formal poses that are nevertheless full of implied movement and power. You carve their faces with care, following the traditional iconography. Their eyes are large and almond-shaped, their noses straight and prominent, their lips full and curved in subtle smiles. The work is slow and demanding. You might spend an entire day working on a single figure, and days or even weeks on a complex section with multiple figures and elaborate backgrounds. The position is difficult. You work standing when carving sections at eye level, but often you must work on your knees for lower sections or on scaffolding for higher ones.
Your back aches.
Your hands develop calluses that eventually become hard as leather. Stone dust covers everything. It gets in your hair, your eyes, your mouth. You breathe it in despite the cloth you tie across your nose and mouth. But despite the difficulty, there is also deep satisfaction in the work. You are creating something that will last for centuries, perhaps forever. Your name will not be remembered, but the work itself will remain. The temple you are helping to build, Angkor Wat, is not merely large. It is built according to precise astronomical and religious calculations. Its orientation is carefully aligned, facing west rather than east, as most Hindu temples do. The measurements of the temple are not arbitrary. They encode religious and cosmological symbolism. The central tower represents Mount Meru, the axis of the universe. The 5 towers of the temple represent the 5 peaks of Mount Meru. The moat represents the cosmic ocean. To enter Angkor Wat is to enter the universe itself, rendered in stone and water and geometry. As the days and months pass, as the rainy season comes and goes and comes again, the temple slowly takes shape. What began as a massive foundation and rough walls gradually transforms into something approaching the architect's vision. The galleries are roofed over with corbelled arches, a building technique that uses progressively overlapping stones to create curved ceilings without the use of mortar. The towers rise, level by level, each level slightly smaller than the one below, creating the distinctive pyramid shape. More carvers arrive to work on higher levels as the lower levels are completed. Painters follow behind the carvers, applying colors to the stone, reds and golds and blues, though these paints will eventually fade and disappear. The causeway leading to the temple from the outer wall is constructed, a magnificent raised stone pathway that crosses the moat and creates a dramatic approach to the central sanctuary. You work on this project for years. It dominates your life in a way that rice farming dominates the lives of the peasants, but unlike farming, which is cyclical and unchanging, construction work offers a sense of progress. Each day you can see what you have accomplished. Each month brings new sections of the temple toward completion. And finally, after decades of work by thousands of men, after the expenditure of resources that would be difficult to calculate, the temple is finished, or rather, it is finished enough. In truth, work continues on decorating and maintaining the temple for generations. But the main structure is complete, and a date is set for its dedication, for the ceremony that will consecrate this space and make it truly holy, truly a dwelling place of the gods. You are present at this ceremony, standing in the crowd of workers and common people who have been allowed to witness the event. The king himself is here, the man whose vision has driven this entire project. He stands at the center of the ceremony, surrounded by Brahmin priests whose chanting fills the air. Smoke from sacred fires drifts across the temple courts. The smell of incense is overwhelming, thick and sweet. The king approaches the central shrine, the innermost sanctuary at the very top of the temple pyramid. Here a statue of Vishnu will be installed, a magnificent sculpture covered in gold and adorned with precious stones. The king makes offerings before this statue, prostrating himself before the god in a display of humility. After the ceremony, as you walk away from the temple, you turn back to look at what you have helped create. The towers rise against the sky, elegant and powerful, and you feel, perhaps for the first time, the full significance of what has been accomplished here. This is more than a building, it is a statement that will endure for centuries. But Angkor Wat, magnificent as it is not the only wonder of this civilization. To truly understand the genius of the Khmer Empire, you must look beyond the temples to the infrastructure that makes them possible, to the water management system that is the true foundation of Khmer prosperity and power. You must understand the borees, the massive rectangular reservoirs that dominate the landscape of Angkor. These are not natural lakes. They are artificial, dug out by human labor over years or decades, each one containing millions of cubic meters of water. Imagine now that you are an engineer, or at least what passes for an engineer in 12th century Cambodia. You have been trained in the traditional knowledge passed down from master to apprentice, knowledge that combines practical experience with religious and cosmological understanding. You know how water flows, how to calculate gradients and volumes, how to build embankments that will hold back immense pressure, how to design channels that will distribute water efficiently across vast areas. You are overseeing the construction of a new barai commissioned by the current king as part of his duty to support his people and honor the gods. The site has been selected after careful consideration. It must be near the capital, but not so close that it disrupts existing settlements. It must be at a higher elevation than the areas it will serve so that water can flow by gravity through the distribution channels. And it must have access to a reliable water source, usually a river that can be diverted to fill the reservoir. The reservoir you are building will be enormous, over 4 miles long and a mile wide, capable of holding more water than you can easily calculate or even imagine. The benefits of such a reservoir are multiple. Most obviously, it stores water from the rainy season for use during the dry season, extending the agricultural growing season and reducing the risk of drought. But it serves other purposes as well. It is a symbol of royal power and divine favor. It also embodies cosmological principles, representing the ocean that surrounds Mount Meru, and practically, it serves as a fishery and as a transportation route. The construction begins with surveying. You and your assistants use simple but effective tools to map out the boundaries of the reservoir and to ensure that the bottom will be level and that the embankments will be properly positioned. Despite their simplicity, these tools, when used with skill and experience, can produce remarkably accurate results. Once the survey is complete, the real work begins. Thousands of laborers are conscripted from nearby villages, fulfilling their obligation to provide corvée labor to the king. They arrive with their own tools, simple hoes and baskets, and they set to work digging. The scale of earth moving required is staggering. The entire interior of the reservoir must be excavated to a depth of several meters, and the soil that is removed must be used to build up the embankments on all 4 sides. The work proceeds slowly but steadily. Lines of workers fill baskets with earth, carry them up the growing embankments, and dump them, then return for another load. It is brutally hard work, especially under the tropical sun. Many of the workers are farmers taken from their fields, and they resent the disruption to their own work, but they have no choice. You move among them, directing the work, ensuring that the embankments are being built up evenly, that the gradient of the reservoir floor is correct. You have authority over these men, but you also understand their resentment and try to be fair in your demands. You ensure they have access to water and food, but they are allowed to rest during the hottest part of the day. As the months pass, the reservoir begins to take shape. The embankments rise higher, massive earthen walls that will contain the water. These embankments must be carefully constructed. The earth must be tamped down firmly, layer by layer, to prevent the walls from eroding or collapsing under the weight of water. The outer faces of the embankments are often reinforced with stone or laterite blocks, creating a more durable surface. The most critical part of the reservoir is the system of gates and channels that control the water flow. At the point where the river will be diverted to fill the reservoir, you oversee the construction of an intake structure, a carefully designed channel with gates that can be opened or closed to control how much water enters. Similar gates are built at the outflow points, where water will be released from the reservoir into the network of canals. The most complex engineering challenge is ensuring that these gates work properly, that they can be opened and closed smoothly, despite the pressure of water against them. You experiment with different designs, testing each one before committing to the final version. When you are finally satisfied, the full-scale versions are constructed and installed. Finally, after years of work, the reservoir is ready to be filled. You choose a moment during the rainy season, when the river is running high. The intake gates are opened, and water begins to flow into the vast excavation you have created. It will take weeks for the reservoir to fill completely, and during this time you monitor it constantly, watching for any signs of problems. But your calculations were correct, your construction was sound. The reservoir fills without incident, and when it is full, you stand on the embankment and look out across the vast expanse of water. This is your achievement, your monument. The barre system becomes one of the defining features of Angkor, and one of the keys to its success. At the height of the empire, there are multiple barres, each one massive, each one connected to the others by an intricate network of canals and channels. This system allows the Khmer to overcome the limitations of their environment, to create agricultural abundance in a landscape that would otherwise only support a much smaller population. The monsoon rains come in torrents for half the year, flooding the land. Then the rains stop, and for the other half of the year, the land bakes under the sun. But with the barre system, water can be captured during the wet season and stored for use during the dry season, allowing for multiple rice harvests per year. This abundance creates the surplus that supports the elaborate superstructure of Khmer civilization. At the very center of this civilization, both literally and symbolically, sits the king. To understand the Khmer Empire, you must understand what it meant to be the god-king, the Divaraja, whose person embodied the state and whose actions could command the labor of millions. You must enter the royal palace, that most sacred and restricted space where the earthly and the divine realms meet. Imagine that you are a high-ranking nobleman, one of the few allowed regular access to the king's presence.
You have been summoned to the palace for a royal audience.
You approach the palace complex through a massive gateway, a stone structure decorated with elaborate carvings and guarded by soldiers in ceremonial armor. These guards are not merely decorative. They are elite warriors whose loyalty to the king is absolute. Once you pass through the gateway, you enter the palace grounds. The palace itself is made of wood. Unlike the stone temples, the wood used is the finest available, aromatic timbers brought from forests far away, polished to a deep lustrous shine and carved with intricate patterns. The roofs are covered with glazed tiles that shimmer in the sunlight. The palace is surrounded by walls, creating a series of courtyards and chambers of increasing exclusivity as you move toward the center. Only high-ranking nobles and priests are allowed in the inner courtyards, and the innermost chamber where the king actually resides is accessible only to the king himself, his immediate family, and a very few trusted attendants. You are led through these spaces by a palace official. Everything about the palace is designed to reinforce the king's divine status. The halls are lit by oil lamps. The air is heavy with incense. The floors are covered with fine reed mats. You wait in an antechamber, preparing yourself mentally for the audience. The protocol for appearing before the king is complex and must be followed exactly. You will enter on your knees, crawling forward until you are at the prescribed distance from the throne. You will then prostrate yourself fully, pressing your forehead to the floor 3 times. Only when the king gives permission will you sit up, and even then you must remain on your knees. You must not look directly at the king's face unless he speaks to you directly. When you speak, you must use the elaborate honorific language reserved for addressing royalty. Finally, you are summoned into the presence chamber. It is a large room, open on one side to a courtyard. The king sits on a raised platform at the far end, his throne a magnificent piece of furniture carved from a single massive piece of wood and covered in gold leaf. The king himself is an imposing figure. He is dressed in silk robes of the finest quality, colored in the royal purple that only he is allowed to wear. He wears an elaborate crown, a towering structure of gold set with precious stones. The crown is so heavy that it would be painful to wear for any length of time, but the king shows no discomfort. He sits perfectly still, his expression serene and composed. You perform the required prostrations, pressing your forehead to the cool mat. When you sit up, you keep your eyes lowered. His voice when it comes is measured and calm. He asks about your province, about the rice harvest, about the condition of the irrigation systems, about whether there has been any unrest among the people. You answer each question carefully, reporting the truth, but phrasing it in ways that will not displease. You report that the harvest was good, that the people are content, that the temples in your region are well maintained. These are the things the king wants to hear. The audience is brief. The king dismisses you with a gesture, or you perform the prostrations again, backing out of the chamber on your knees. As you leave the palace, you feel a mixture of relief and satisfaction. The audience went well. You have fulfilled your duty, maintained your standing at court. These audiences are how the king maintains his connection to his far-flung realm, how he ensures that his will is being carried out in the provinces. But the king's power is not merely ceremonial. He is also a military leader, expected to personally lead his armies into battle. The royal day follows a strict routine, ordained by religious and astrological principles. The king rises before dawn. He bathes in water that has been specially prepared. He dresses with the help of attendants. He eats a breakfast prepared by special cooks. Then he proceeds to the temple for morning prayers. After the morning prayers, he turns to the business of governance, receiving officials, hearing reports, making decisions. In the evening, there is more ritual, more prayer, more offerings. The king's life is not his own. It belongs to the state, to the people, to the gods. He must always be the God King, always perfect, always composed. It is a tremendous burden. But Angkor is not isolated. The Khmer Empire exists within a larger world of trade and diplomacy, connected by sea and land routes to civilizations across Asia. To understand the full scope of Khmer influence and prosperity, you must imagine yourself as a merchant, traveling the trade routes that connect Angkor to the wider world. Your ship is moored at the port of the empire, a bustling complex where goods from across Southeast Asia are loaded and unloaded. You are a foreign trader, a merchant from Song Dynasty China, and you have made this journey many times. The voyage from your home port takes weeks, sailing down the coast of China, past the kingdoms of Vietnam, and finally into the Gulf of Thailand. Your ship is a large ocean-going junk, sturdy and seaworthy, with multiple masts and a hold that can carry tons of cargo. The hold is currently filled with goods from China, porcelain vessels, silk cloth, iron tools and weapons, copper ingots and medicinal herbs. These goods represent a massive investment. As your ship approaches the harbor, you see the bustle of commercial activity. Other ships are moored along the riverbanks. The harbor itself is a marvel of organization. There are designated areas for different kinds of vessels. There are warehouses where goods can be stored. There are customs houses where royal officials record every transaction and collect taxes. And there are markets, sprawling open-air complexes where merchants from across Asia come to trade. You see traders from India with their cargoes of cotton cloth and spices. You see Arab merchants from far to the west. You see local Khmer traders with goods from the interior. You arrange for your cargo to be unloaded and transported to a warehouse you have rented. The customs officials are meticulous, recording every item and assessing its value for tax purposes. The tax rate is substantial, perhaps 10%, but it is fixed and predictable. Once the customs formalities are complete and the tax is paid, you are free to begin selling. You do not sell your goods directly to end consumers. Instead, you sell to local merchants who will distribute them throughout the kingdom. The negotiations are complex and can take days. Professional translators facilitate the discussions. The bargaining is fierce but respectful. Both sides understand that they need each other. Eventually prices are agreed upon, and the goods change hands. Payment is made in a mixture of currency and trade goods. The Khmer use coins, but much trade is still conducted through barter. You receive silver ingots, gold dust, and also trade goods that you can sell profitably when you return to China. The most valuable of these is spices, particularly pepper and cinnamon. You also take on aromatic woods that are prized in China. While in port, you observe the city itself. Angkor is unlike any city you have seen. Chinese cities are compact and densely built, surrounded by massive walls. Angkor sprawls across the landscape with no clear boundaries. The temples dominate everything. You visit Angkor Wat, paying the small fee required of foreign visitors, and you are awestruck. You make careful observations, mental notes that you will later commit to writing. When you return to China, you will submit a report to the imperial court describing what you have seen. After several weeks in port, your business is concluded. Your ship is loaded with new cargo. You pay your respects to the local officials, making small gifts to ensure your welcome on future visits, and then you depart, beginning the long journey home. As Angkor fades into the distance behind you, you reflect on what you have seen. This is a rich kingdom, well organized and powerful, but you also noted weaknesses. The kingdom's wealth depends heavily on rice agriculture, and that agriculture depends on the massive irrigation system. If that system were to fail, the entire kingdom could collapse quickly. The Khmer Empire at its height is not just a cultural and economic power, but also a military one. To truly understand the empire, you must understand its wars, its armies, and the ambitions that drove its kings to expand their realm through conquest. You must imagine yourself as a soldier in the royal army, preparing to march to war against one of the empire's traditional enemies. You are not a professional soldier in the modern sense. For most of the year, you are a farmer, working your rice fields and supporting your family. But you are also a member of the royal levy, obligated to serve in the army when called upon by the king. That call has come. Messengers have arrived in your village with orders from the capital. The king is assembling an army to march against the Cham kingdom to the east. The Cham are an old enemy, a maritime people who control the coast of what is now central Vietnam. They have been raiding Khmer territory, and the king has decided that this insult cannot be tolerated. You gather your equipment with a mixture of apprehension and resignation. War is dangerous, but it is also your duty, and there is no question of refusing. Your equipment is simple. You have a spear with an iron point. You have a shield made of wood and leather. You have a short knife for close combat. You wear no armor. Metal armor is reserved for elite units and nobles. You wear your ordinary clothes, a cotton tunic and trousers. You bring with you a supply of rice and a water flask. The journey to the capital takes several days. You travel with a group of men from your village. Along the way you join larger and larger groups as the streams of soldiers converge on Angkor. By the time you reach the mustering grounds, you are part of a massive force, thousands upon thousands of men assembled for war. The sight is both impressive and intimidating. Royal officials move through the crowd, organizing men into units, assigning them to commanders, distributing additional equipment and supplies. The hierarchy of the army mirrors the hierarchy of society. At the bottom are the common soldiers like you. Above you are better equipped soldiers. Higher still are the elite units, professional warriors who form the core of the army. And at the very top is the nobility, the commanders who will lead the various divisions, and ultimately the king himself who will command the entire force. The king's presence transforms the army from a mere mob into something more. He appears on the second day, riding a war elephant, an enormous beast draped in armor and decorative cloth. The elephant itself is impressive, a massive animal that towers above the crowd. Dozens of such elephants are part of the army, each carrying either a noble commander or serving as a mobile platform for archers. The king addresses the army, his voice amplified by the priests who stand near him. He speaks of duty and honor, of the insults that must be avenged, of the glory that awaits those who fight bravely. He invokes the gods, and he makes promises. Successful soldiers will be rewarded with captured land and goods. The march east begins the next day. An army of this size moves slowly. The roads are good by contemporary standards, but they are still narrow. The army stretches for miles. The pace is measured to avoid exhausting the soldiers before they reach the battlefield. You walk for most of each day, resting during the hottest hours, camping each night. The organization of the march is impressive. Scouts range ahead. Supply wagons follow behind. Engineers travel with the army to repair bridges and roads, and priests conduct rituals each morning and evening. After weeks of marching, you finally reach Cham territory. The first battle comes suddenly. The Cham have deployed an army to block your advance, and the two forces meet on a plain near a river. You find yourself in the middle of the Khmer formation, surrounded by other soldiers from your region. The opposing army is visible across the plain. For a long moment, nothing happens. The two armies simply stand facing each other. Then the command is given, and the army begins to advance. The battle itself is chaos. As the two armies clash, all organization dissolves into a confused mass of struggling men. You use your spear to thrust at enemy soldiers. Your shield takes several blows. Around you, men are fighting and dying. The noise is overwhelming. Time becomes strange. You have no sense of how the larger battle is going. You can see only what is immediately around you, and you fight purely on instinct. The battle ends when the cham line breaks. Suddenly the enemy soldiers are running, and the Khmer soldiers are pursuing them. The pursuit does not last long. The Khmer army regroups on the battlefield. You look around at the aftermath. The ground is littered with bodies. The wounded are crying out. Your unit was lucky. Other units were devastated. The campaign continues for months. There are more battles, more sieges, more marching through difficult terrain. Gradually the Khmer army advances deeper into Cham territory. The king achieves his objective. The Cham are forced to submit, to acknowledge Khmer overlordship and to pay tribute. It is a decisive victory, one that will be commemorated in inscriptions. For you personally, the campaign has been both traumatic and transformative. You have seen combat, survived, and even distinguished yourself. When you finally return home, after months away, you are subtly changed. You have proven yourself as a warrior. You are also more aware of the empire's power. But all this power, all this military might and organizational brilliance, all these magnificent temples and sophisticated engineering works, all of it depends ultimately on one thing: water. And water in Cambodia means the monsoon, the great seasonal weather pattern that dominates life in this part of the world. To understand the Khmer Empire, you must understand the monsoon, must experience what it means when the rains come. You are back in your village, back in your house, on stilts, and it is the 5th month of the year. The dry season is ending. For months, the land has baked under the relentless sun. The rice paddies have been dry. The canals have run low. Dust has covered everything. But now, you feel a change in the air. The heat is still intense, but there is a heaviness to the atmosphere. The sky, which has been clear and blue for months, now shows signs of change. Clouds appear on the horizon, great towering masses that grow taller as the day progresses. Then, one afternoon it begins. At first there are just a few drops, large and heavy, then more drops, coming faster. And then suddenly the sky opens and the rain comes down in torrents. Within minutes the dusty ground is transformed into mud, water flowing in streams down every slope. The rain is unlike anything you experience in the dry season. It falls with such intensity that you can barely see across the village. The sound of it on the thatched roof is deafening. You stand in the doorway and watch the transformation. The children dance in the rain, shouting and laughing. Your spouse is outside, setting out every container to catch the falling water. The rain continues for hours. When it finally eases, the world has been transformed. The air is cool and fresh. The smell of wet earth rises from the ground. The land, which was brown and lifeless, now shows hints of green, but this is only the beginning. Over the next weeks, the pattern will establish itself. Every afternoon, the clouds will build, and the rains will come. The dry channels will become raging torrents. The rice paddies will fill with water. The berets will fill. The monsoon season transforms daily life in fundamental ways. Work in the fields becomes more difficult, the constant mud making every task harder. But it is also essential work. The time when the rice must be planted. You transplant the rice seedlings, standing in the warm, muddy water for hours, back bent. The work is back-breaking. But there is also a sense of hope. The rice is growing, and if the monsoon continues as it should, the harvest will be good. The monsoon also brings challenges. Disease spreads more easily in the wet season. The wooden houses require constant maintenance, and there is always the danger of flooding, of too much rain causing the canals and reservoirs to overflow. In the Great Barriers, the water rises steadily with each rain. The engineers monitor constantly, adjusting the gates to maintain proper levels. The balance is delicate. Too little water means shortage during the dry season. Too much means catastrophic flooding. For the king and the nobility, the monsoon is also a time of ritual and ceremony. The onset of the rains is marked by special religious observances, prayers and offerings to the gods who control the weather. As the monsoon season progresses, the landscape becomes increasingly green and lush. The rice grows tall. The trees and vegetation respond to the abundant water. The jungle becomes a riot of life and color. Flowers bloom, fruits ripen. But the monsoon is also a time of isolation. The roads become nearly impassable. Travel slows to a crawl. Each village becomes more self-sufficient. Even within Angkor itself, movement becomes more difficult. Boats become the primary means of transportation. Life during the monsoon requires adaptation and resilience. But the people of the Khmer Empire have been dealing with the monsoon for generations. They know its patterns, understand its demands. The monsoon is not an obstacle to be overcome, but a fundamental reality to be embraced, the source of life that makes everything else possible. Without the monsoon, there would be no rice. Without rice, there would be no surplus. Without surplus, there would be no cities, no temples, no empire. But no civilization lasts forever. The Khmer Empire, for all its sophistication and power, contained within itself the seeds of its own decline. By the 14th century, the forces that would eventually bring down the empire were already at work. To understand the fall of Angkor, you must look beyond the obvious external threats to the deeper structural problems. You are a middle-aged man now, a farmer like your father before you. But things have changed in subtle ways. The harvests are not as reliable as they once were. Some years the monsoon comes late or ends early. Other years it brings too much rain. The great berets still function, but they require constant maintenance, and increasingly, that maintenance is not being properly carried out. The canals are silting up, becoming shallower and less effective. You and your neighbors try to maintain them yourselves, but you lack the tools and organization to do the work properly. In the past, royal officials would have organized large-scale maintenance projects, but those projects have become less frequent. The labor is instead being directed to other purposes, to building new temples, to military campaigns. The temples themselves have changed. The Khmer kings have always been great builders, each one trying to surpass his predecessors. But in recent generations, this competition has reached an extreme. The current king has commissioned a massive new temple complex. The resources poured into this project are staggering. Thousands of workers are conscripted. The financial cost is immense, and the spiritual cost is also significant. The new temple is dedicated to Buddhist deities, reflecting the king's personal religious orientation. But much of the population still follows Hindu practices, and they view this massive expenditure with resentment. The religious unity that once characterized the empire is fracturing. There are other signs of trouble. The borders, which once seemed secure, are under increasing pressure. To the west, the Thai kingdoms are growing in power. For a long time, these kingdoms acknowledged Khmer overlordship, but increasingly, they are asserting their independence, refusing tribute, and even raiding Khmer territory. The Khmer army has lost some of its effectiveness. The constant wars have taken their toll. There have been defeats, humiliating losses that undermine the God King's divine authority. If the king truly has the favor of the gods, people whisper, why is he losing battles? The question of religion becomes increasingly divisive. Buddhism is becoming more dominant, particularly among the elite. Some kings now identify primarily as Buddhist rather than Hindu. This shift has profound implications. The entire concept of the Devaraja is rooted in Hindu theology. Buddhism, with its emphasis on impermanence, sits uneasily with the idea of divine kingship. As Buddhism becomes more influential, the ideological foundation of royal authority begins to erode. People begin to question whether the kings really are gods. And then there are the environmental challenges. The Barai system is based on a delicate balance. The system was designed when the population was smaller, but over the centuries, the population has grown significantly. The system is now operating at or beyond its capacity. During dry years, there is not enough water to go around. Conflicts over water become common. The royal officials who are supposed to mediate these disputes are increasingly corrupt. The environmental impact of deforestation is also becoming apparent. The vast building projects have required enormous quantities of timber. Entire forests have been cleared. Without tree roots to hold the soil, erosion increases. Silt washes into the canals and barais, filling them and reducing their capacity. The water system begins to malfunction. Then comes the war that changes everything. In 1431, a Thai army besieges Angkor itself. The capital, which has never been seriously threatened, which has no defensive walls, is suddenly vulnerable. The Thai army is large and well organized. The siege lasts for months. Supplies run low. Disease breaks out. The great berets which once symbolized Khmer mastery over nature now become traps. Finally, the decision is made to abandon the city. The king and his court flee south to establish a new capital. Angkor is left to the Thai armies, who occupy it briefly before withdrawing. But the city never recovers. Without the concentration of royal power and resources, without the constant maintenance, Angkor begins to decline rapidly. The temples remain, but the wooden palaces decay. The irrigation system falls into disrepair. The canals fill with silt. The rice paddies dry up or become overgrown. The jungle, which the Khmer had pushed back for centuries, begins to reclaim the land. Trees take root in cracks in the pavement. Vines grow over walls. Roots work their way between stone blocks. The process is slow but inexorable. Within a generation, many of the wooden structures have vanished. Within a century, the jungle has reclaimed much of the city. The Khmer Empire continues to exist, but its center has shifted. The new capitals are smaller and more modest. The great age of temple building is over. The empire gradually shrinks, losing territory to Thai kingdoms in the west and Vietnamese expansion in the east. By the 15th and 16th centuries, the Khmer kingdom is a shadow of its former self. For you, the farmer, the decline is not a single dramatic event but a gradual deterioration. The taxes you pay no longer result in benefits. The temples stand empty. The pride you once felt fades, replaced by a focus on survival. And so the great city falls silent. The stone temples continue to stand, but the human voices that once filled them fade away. The complex rituals cease. The temples become home to bats and birds, to insects and the relentless growth of the jungle. For centuries, Angkor exists in a strange liminal state, neither truly abandoned nor truly inhabited. Local people continue to live in the region, farming smaller plots, visiting some of the temples for their own purposes. But the grand vision that created Angkor is gone. You can imagine the scene, centuries after the abandonment, in the deep jungle where Angkor Wat still stands. The morning mist drifts through the galleries. Monkeys move across the roofs. A fig tree has taken root high on the central tower, its roots cascading down the carved walls. The moat is still there, filled with murky green water. The causeway is broken in places. The carvings are softened by lichen and moss. To a person who stumbles upon this place without knowledge of its history, it must seem utterly otherworldly. This is how the temples are rediscovered by Europeans in the 19th century. French explorers hear local stories of ancient ruins. They hire guides and hack their way through dense vegetation until they suddenly emerge into clearings where massive stone structures rise above the trees. Their accounts spark enormous interest in Europe. Here are monuments that rival anything in Greece or Rome, but built by a civilization about which Europe knows almost nothing. Scholars and adventurers begin to arrive. They clear away vegetation, take photographs, make drawings. They copy inscriptions and begin the slow work of decipherment. Gradually, the story of the Khmer Empire begins to be reconstructed. But even today, Angkor retains its mystery. The jungle has been pushed back again. The temples have been stabilized. Tourists walk through the galleries by the thousands every day. But fundamental questions remain unanswered. We do not fully understand how the hydraulic system worked. We cannot translate all the inscriptions. The Khmer did not leave extensive written records. Most of what we know comes from the temples themselves, from stone inscriptions, from the accounts of foreign visitors. From these fragments we construct our understanding, but we know that we are missing vast amounts of information. What we can say with certainty is that the Khmer Empire represented one of the great achievements of human civilization. It was a society that developed sophisticated solutions to environmental challenges. It was a civilization that pushed the boundaries of architecture and engineering. It was a culture that synthesized influences from India, China, and indigenous Southeast Asian traditions into something unique. And it was an empire that at height dominated a large region. The Khmer Empire fell as all empires eventually do, but it left behind something permanent. The temples still stand. The artistic traditions continue in modified forms. The memory persists. And perhaps most importantly, the achievement of the Khmer serves as a reminder of human capability. And so our journey through the history of the Khmer Empire comes to an end. We have walked through the jungle at dawn and seen the mist rise from the ancient stones. We have stood on a sacred mountain and witnessed the transformation of a mortal king into a god. We have worked in the rice paddies, have carved stone in the shadow of great temples, have managed the flow of water through canals and reservoirs. We have sat before the throne of the God King, have sailed the trade routes, have marched with armies to distant wars. We have experienced the monsoon rains, both their blessing and their burden, and we have witnessed the slow decline, the gradual fading of glory, the jungle reclaiming what was once the greatest city in Southeast Asia. The story of the Khmer Empire is a story of ambition and achievement, but it is also a story of impermanence. Everything that rises must eventually fall. Every civilization, no matter how powerful, eventually declines. The temples that seemed eternal are now ruins. Magnificent ruins, to be sure, but ruins nonetheless. And yet in their way they have achieved a kind of immortality. They have outlasted the empire that built them, outlasted the religious system they were created to serve, outlasted the language and the culture that gave them meaning. They stand now as monuments not to any particular king or god, but to human aspiration itself, to the desire to create something that transcends the limits of a single lifetime. If you travel to Cambodia today, if you make the journey to Angkor, you can still feel the power of this ancient civilization. You can walk the same paths that farmers and merchants walked 1,000 years ago. You can stand in the same galleries where stone carvers once worked. You can see the sunrise behind the central towers of Angkor Wat, the silhouette of those 5 perfect pinnacles against the brightening sky. You can trace with your fingers the carvings that tell stories of gods and heroes. You can stand at the edge of one of the great berets and try to imagine what it took to build such a structure. You can walk through the fortress city of Ta Prohm, where the jungle has been deliberately left in place, where massive tree roots embrace the stone structures in a powerful visual reminder of nature's patient strength. But even as you marvel at what remains, remember that what you are seeing is only a fraction of what once existed. The temples are the bones of Angkor, impressive and enduring, but they are only bones. The flesh of the city, the wooden houses and markets and palaces, all of that is gone. The people who lived here, their voices and laughter, their arguments and celebrations, their ordinary daily lives, all of that exists now only in imagination. We can reconstruct some of it from archaeology and inscriptions, but much is lost forever. The Khmer Empire teaches us many lessons. It shows us the power of human ingenuity, the remarkable things that can be accomplished when a society develops effective institutions and mobilizes its resources. It shows us the importance of adapting to environmental conditions. It shows us that civilizations are built not just by great kings but by millions of ordinary people who farm the fields, carry the stones, dig the canals. And it shows us that nothing lasts forever, that even the most powerful empires eventually decline, that the forces of nature and time are stronger than any human creation. But it also shows us that something of what we create can endure, that the work of our hands can outlast us. As you lie here now, in the comfort of your own time and place, far removed from the jungle heat and the monsoon rains, from the sound of chisels on stone and the smell of incense in ancient temples, let the story of the Khmer Empire settle over you like the evening mist over Angkor. Let it remind you of the long sweep of human history, of the countless civilizations that have risen and fallen, each one convinced of its own permanence, each one eventually returning to the earth from which it came. Let it give you perspective on your own time, reminding you that the problems that seem so urgent today will one day be as distant as the political disputes of 12th century Cambodia. And let it give you peace, the peace that comes from understanding that you are part of something larger than yourself, part of the great human story that stretches back through the millennia and will continue long into the future. The temples of Angkor still stand in the Cambodian jungle, silent witnesses to a vanished world. The stones remember what they have seen, though they cannot speak of it. The carvings preserve the images of gods and kings, frozen in their eternal dance. The towers rise toward a sky that looks much the same as it did 1,000 years ago, though everything beneath it has changed. And somewhere in the forest, where the tree roots push through ancient pavements and the morning mist drifts through empty galleries, the spirit of the Khmer Empire lingers still, patient and timeless, waiting for those who take the time to listen to its story. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time, through the lost kingdom of the Khmer before the monsoon. Our story fades now, like the light fading from the sky at day's end, like the memories of an ancient empire fading into legend and myth. But the echoes remain, preserved in stone and water, in the shape of the land and the rhythm of the seasons. The Khmer may be gone, but they are not forgotten. Their achievement endures, a testament to what human beings can accomplish when they work together toward a common vision, when they pour their skill and sweat and devotion into creating something larger than themselves. Rest well now, and let your dreams carry you to distant times and places, to the sound of temple bells in the morning and the scent of jasmine on the evening breeze. Until we meet again for another journey into the past, sleep peacefully, and may your rest be as deep and serene as the jungle silence that surrounds the ancient temples of Angkor. But before we close this chapter entirely, before we let the story fade completely into the realm of dreams and distant memory, there is more to understand about this remarkable civilization, more depth to explore in the daily rhythms and spiritual practices that defined life in the Khmer Empire. Let us return once more to Angkor at its height, to walk through its markets and workshops, to witness the festivals that brought color and joy to the lives of its people, to understand the beliefs that gave meaning to their existence. Imagine that it is a festival day in Angkor, one of the many religious celebrations that punctuate the calendar year. The city is transformed. The usual routines of work and commerce are suspended, and the entire population, from the humblest farmer to the most exalted noble, participates in the celebration. You wake early, before the sun has fully risen, because today is special. Today is the festival honoring Vishnu, one of the great gods of the Hindu pantheon and the patron deity of Angkor Wat itself. The preparations for this festival have been underway for weeks. Special foods have been prepared, new clothes have been sewn, offerings have been gathered. You dress in your finest clothing, a length of silk cloth that you have been saving for occasions such as this. The silk is dyed a deep blue, a color achieved through multiple immersions in indigo extracted from local plants. The fabric is soft and cool against your skin, a luxury that you rarely allow yourself. Your spouse and children are also dressed in their best, and together your family joins the stream of people making their way toward the central temple complex. The paths and roads are crowded with humanity, all moving in the same direction, drawn by the promise of spectacle and spiritual merit. As you approach Angkor Wat, you see that the temple has been decorated for the occasion. Banners of colored cloth hang from the towers, fluttering in the morning breeze. Garlands of flowers have been draped over doorways and across balustrades, their fragrance mixing with the ever-present smell of incense. The causeway leading to the temple is lined with oil lamps, thousands of small clay vessels filled with oil and fitted with wicks, all of them burning steadily despite the daylight, creating a path of flickering light that leads into the sacred precinct. The visual effect is stunning, a river of flame guiding pilgrims toward the divine. The crowds are enormous, larger than anything you see on an ordinary day. People have come from villages miles away, some of them having walked through the night to arrive in time for the dawn ceremonies. There are farmers like yourself, their faces weathered by sun and work, their hands rough with calluses. There are craftsmen and merchants, recognizable by their slightly finer clothing and the confident way they move through the crowd. There are priests and religious officials, their heads shaved, their bodies draped in simple white cloth that marks their sacred status. And there are nobles, a few of them, moving through the crowd in small groups, their presence causing the common people to step aside and bow respectfully. The nobles are dressed in silk of such fine quality that it seems to shimmer with its own light, and they wear jewelry of gold and precious stones that catches the sun and throws back brilliant flashes of color. The ceremonies begin with the first rays of sunlight touching the tops of the temple towers. A conch shell is blown, its deep mournful note echoing across the temple complex and out over the city. This is the signal that the rituals are beginning. The priests emerge from the inner sanctum, moving in a solemn procession. They carry offerings, platters of fruit and flowers, bowls of rice, vessels of perfumed oil. These offerings are brought to the central shrine where the image of Vishnu resides, and there, in rituals that most of the crowd cannot see but can only imagine, they are presented to the god. The priests chant mantras in Sanskrit, their voices rising and falling in complex patterns that have been passed down through generations of religious training. For you standing in the outer courtyard with hundreds of other pilgrims, the exact words of the prayers are incomprehensible. Sanskrit is the language of the gods and of learned priests, not the language of farmers. But you do not need to understand the words to feel their power. The sound itself is sacred. The vibrations of these ancient syllables believed to have the power to invoke divine presence, to create a bridge between the earthly and heavenly realms. You close your eyes and let the sound wash over you, feeling a sense of peace and connection that is difficult to describe but deeply satisfying. This is why you have come, why thousands of others have come, not just to fulfill a religious obligation, but to experience this moment of transcendence, to feel yourself part of something larger and more meaningful than the daily struggle for survival. After the morning prayers, the festival continues with more public spectacles. There are dances, elaborate performances by trained dancers whose every movement is precisely choreographed and laden with symbolic meaning. The dancers are young women, selected for their beauty and trained from childhood in this sacred art. They wear costumes of incredible intricacy, layers of silk and brocade, headdresses studded with gold and gems. Their faces are painted white, their lips colored red, their eyes outlined in dark kohl. As they dance, their hands move through a complex vocabulary of gestures, each position of the fingers conveying specific meanings, telling stories of gods and demons, of cosmic battles and divine loves. You watch, mesmerized, as the dancers transform themselves into divine beings, as the temple courtyard becomes the stage for the eternal dramas of the cosmos. There is music as well, provided by an ensemble of musicians playing traditional instruments. You hear the deep resonant tones of bronze gongs, struck with padded mallets to produce sounds that seem to vibrate in your chest. You hear the high, clear notes of bamboo flutes, their melodies floating above the heavier percussion. You hear drums of various sizes, their rhythms complex and interlocking, driving the music forward with irresistible energy. And you hear the strange haunting sound of a string instrument played with a bow, its voice almost human in its expressiveness. The musicians are as skilled as the dancers, their performance the result of years of training and practice. The festival continues through the day. There are processions, as sacred images are carried through the streets on palanquins borne by teams of men. The largest of these processions includes an image of Vishnu himself, or rather a representation of the god in one of his many avatars. The image is made of wood covered in gold leaf, its eyes inlaid with precious stones, its expression serene and benevolent. As the procession passes, people press forward to offer flowers and incense, to receive the blessing of the god's presence. Some prostrate themselves fully on the ground, their foreheads touching the dust, overcome with devotion. Others simply press their hands together at their chest and bow respectfully. Children are lifted up by their parents so they can see, and they stare wide-eyed at the spectacle, these images and experiences forming memories that will last their entire lives. There is also food, more food than you normally see in one place. Temporary market stalls have been set up around the temple complex, and vendors sell special festival delicacies. There are sweets made from palm sugar and coconut, sticky and intensely sweet. There are savory snacks, rice cakes wrapped in banana leaves and grilled over charcoal. There are fruits, mangoes and rambutans and longans, piled high in colorful pyramids. The smell of cooking food fills the air, making your stomach rumble despite the breakfast you ate before leaving home. You buy a small treat for your children, watching their faces light up with joy as they taste the rare sweetness. These small moments of happiness, these brief respites from the hardship of daily life, are precious. The festival provides not just religious merit, but also simple human pleasure, a reminder that life is not only about work and duty, but also about joy and celebration. As the sun begins to set, the festival enters its final phase. More lamps are lit, thousands upon thousands of them, until the entire temple complex glows with warm, flickering light. The effect is magical, transforming the stone structures into something ethereal and otherworldly. The towers of Angkor Wat, already impressive by daylight, become almost supernatural in this light, their silhouettes sharp against the darkening sky, their surfaces dancing with shadows cast by the moving flames. There is one final ceremony, a blessing given by the head priest. He stands on a raised platform where he can be seen by the assembled crowd, and he speaks words of benediction, asking the gods to protect the king, to bless the kingdom, to ensure good harvests and prosperity for all. The crowd responds with a murmur of assent, thousands of voices creating a sound like the distant roar of the ocean. Finally, reluctantly, people begin to disperse, making their way home through the darkness. You walk back to your house with your family, tired but content. The festival has been everything you hoped for. You have made your offerings to the gods, you have fulfilled your religious duties, and you have been reminded of your place in the grand cosmic order. but you have also enjoyed yourself, have spent time with your family, have experienced beauty and wonder. These festivals are essential to life in the Khmer Empire. They provide structure to the year, marking the passage of time with moments of celebration and spiritual renewal. They reinforce social bonds, bringing together people from all levels of society in shared devotion, and they validate the authority of the king, demonstrating his role as the intermediary between the human and divine worlds. Beyond the great festivals, daily religious practice permeates every aspect of life in Angkor. Every home, no matter how humble, has a small shrine where offerings are made to household spirits and ancestral ghosts. These offerings are simple: a few grains of rice, a stick of incense, a flower picked from the garden, but they are made regularly, often daily, acknowledging the presence of the spiritual realm in the midst of the material world. The beliefs that guide these practices are complex, a synthesis of formal Hindu and Buddhist theology with older animistic traditions that predate the empire itself. You believe in the great gods of the Hindu pantheon, Shiva and Vishnu and Brahma, the creator, preserver, and destroyer, who together maintain the cosmic order. You know the stories of their deeds, passed down through generations, told and retold by wandering storytellers and enacted by dancers at festivals. But you also believe in a host of lesser spirits, beings that inhabit specific places and objects. There are spirits of the rice fields, whose favor must be sought before planting. There are spirits of the rivers and canals, who control the flow of water that is so essential to life. There are spirits of the forest, dangerous beings who must be appeased before trees are cut or land is cleared. And there are the spirits of your ancestors, the ghosts of your parents and grandparents and more distant forebears, who watch over your family and who will be offended if they are not properly honored. This multiplicity of spiritual beings creates a complex religious landscape that you must navigate carefully. Different spirits require different offerings and different forms of respect. Some are pleased by food, others by incense, still others by the recitation of specific prayers or mantras. Getting it wrong, failing to make the proper offering or making an offering to the wrong spirit, can bring misfortune. Crops can fail, children can sicken, accidents can happen. And so you are careful following the traditions that have been passed down, consulting with local wise men and women when you are unsure about the proper procedures. The monks and priests of Buddhism and Hinduism coexist in Angkor, sometimes in tension, but more often in a kind of pragmatic cooperation. Some temples are specifically Buddhist, others specifically Hindu, but many incorporate elements of both traditions. The king might be a devout Buddhist, commissioning temples dedicated to the Buddha and supporting monasteries where monks study and meditate, but he still performs Hindu rituals, still maintains the fiction of being a god-king in the Hindu tradition, because that is what the political system requires. This religious flexibility, this ability to hold multiple belief systems simultaneously without seeing them as contradictory, is characteristic of Southeast Asian Buddhism and Hinduism. It is very different from the exclusive monotheism of the Abrahamic religions, where the worship of one god necessarily excludes the worship of others. For you, this religious complexity is simply the way things are. You do not see any contradiction in making offerings to Hindu gods at the great temples, while also supporting Buddhist monks who pass through your village with their begging bowls. You do not question the fact that the spirits you propitiate at your household shrine predate both Buddhism and Hinduism and belong to a much older stratum of belief. All of these spiritual forces are real, all of them have power, and all of them must be respected. Your goal is not theological consistency, but practical efficacy. You want to ensure the well-being of your family, the success of your crops, the continuation of life in an environment that is often harsh and unpredictable. Religion provides you with tools to manage the uncertainties of existence, to feel that you have some control over forces that might otherwise seem random and overwhelming. The workshops and markets of Angkor are another essential aspect of the city's life. Places where the agricultural surplus produced by farmers like yourself is transformed into the goods that make civilization possible. Imagine that you are a craftsman, a bronze worker, one of the skilled artisans whose labor produces the tools and weapons, the statues and ritual objects that are so essential to the functioning of the empire. Your workshop is located in one of the artisan quarters of the city, a neighborhood where the air is filled with the sounds of hammering and the smells of various trades. Your specific craft is demanding and requires years of training to master. Bronze is an alloy of copper and tin, and achieving the correct proportions is crucial. Too much tin makes the bronze brittle and prone to shattering. too little makes it soft and unable to hold an edge. The perfect balance produces a metal that is both hard and slightly flexible, capable of being sharpened to a keen edge, and able to withstand repeated impacts without breaking. You learned this craft from your father, who learned it from his father, a lineage of knowledge passed down through generations. The techniques are closely guarded secrets, taught only to family members or to carefully selected apprentices who have proven their trustworthiness and dedication. Your workshop contains the tools and equipment accumulated over generations. There is a furnace, a carefully constructed chamber lined with clay that can reach the high temperatures necessary to melt metal. The furnace is fueled by charcoal, and achieving the right temperature requires skill and constant attention. Too cool, and the metal will not melt properly. Too hot, and it may burn, incorporating unwanted elements that weaken the final product. You have learned to judge the temperature by the color of the flames and the appearance of the molten metal, knowledge that cannot be taught from books but only learned through long experience. You work on a commission from a wealthy merchant, a set of bronze vessels to be used in religious ceremonies. The vessels must be of the highest quality, both functionally sound and aesthetically beautiful, because they will be offered to a temple and will be seen by priests and worshippers. You begin by preparing the mold, a process that itself requires considerable skill. The mold is made from clay mixed with sand and other materials to give it the right properties. It must be strong enough to withstand the heat and weight of the molten metal, but porous enough to allow gases to escape. You shape the mold around a model made of wax, creating a negative space in the exact shape of the vessel you intend to cast. Once the mold is prepared and dried, you begin the process of melting the bronze. You start a fire in the furnace and feed it carefully with charcoal, gradually building up the heat. When the furnace reaches the correct temperature, you add pieces of copper and tin in the correct proportions, watching as they slowly soften and liquefy. The molten metal glows with a fierce orange light, and the heat radiating from the furnace is intense, making your face flush and sweat run down your back. When the metal is fully melted and has reached the right consistency, you use long tongs to lift the crucible from the furnace and carefully pour the molten bronze into the prepared mold. This is the moment of greatest danger and greatest tension. If you pour too quickly, the metal may splash, causing burns. If you pour too slowly, it may begin to cool and solidify before the mold is completely filled, resulting in an imperfect casting. You pour with steady hands, the product of years of practice, filling the mold evenly and completely. Then you set it aside to cool, a process that takes hours. When the metal has finally solidified and cooled sufficiently, you break away the outer mold, revealing the rough bronze vessel within. But the work is far from complete. The surface of the casting is rough and marked with imperfections, the inevitable result of the casting process. Now begins the long work of finishing. You use files and scrapers to remove the rough spots, gradually smoothing the surface. You polish the bronze with increasingly fine abrasives, working the surface until it gleams. If the vessel is to be decorated, you use chisels and engraving tools to carve patterns into the surface, geometric designs or images of gods and mythical creatures. This decorative work requires a steady hand and an artistic sensibility, the ability to visualize the final design and to execute it with precision. When you are finally satisfied with your work, when the vessels meet your exacting standards, you deliver them to the merchant who commissioned them. He examines them carefully, testing their weight and balance, inspecting the finish and the decoration. He nods his approval, and payment is arranged. The price is calculated in units of rice or in silver, depending on the agreement you reached at the beginning of the project. The payment is substantial, reflecting the skill and time required to produce such high-quality work. With this payment, you can support your family, can buy the food and clothing you need, can maintain your workshop and purchase the raw materials for your next commission. This is how the economy of Angkor functions, a complex web of specialization and exchange. Farmers produce the rice that feeds everyone. The surplus beyond what the farmers need for themselves is collected as tax and stored in royal granaries. This surplus supports the king and his court, the priests and their temples, the soldiers and their weapons. But it also supports craftsmen like you, specialists who do not grow their own food, but instead produce the metal tools that farmers need, the weapons that soldiers carry, the ritual objects that priests use in their ceremonies. The system works because of the agricultural abundance made possible by the irrigation infrastructure, and because of the political stability provided by the concept of divine kingship. Both of these elements are essential. Remove either one, and the entire system begins to collapse. The final days of Angkor, when they come, are not marked by a single catastrophic event, but by a gradual accumulation of failures and misfortunes. The irrigation system, neglected and inadequately maintained, becomes less efficient. Canals that should be cleared of silt are allowed to fill in. Embankments that should be repaired are left to erode. The Great Barrays, once so carefully managed, are no longer regulated with the same precision. In some areas there is too much water, causing flooding and destroying crops. In other areas there is too little, causing drought and famine. The agricultural surplus shrinks, and with it the ability of the state to support its elaborate superstructure. The political situation becomes increasingly unstable. The Thai kingdoms to the west, once tributaries of the Khmer Empire, are now powerful states in their own right. They probe the borders, testing Khmer defenses, launching raids that penetrate deeper and deeper into Khmer territory. The Khmer armies once feared across Southeast Asia are no longer able to effectively respond. Military defeats accumulate, each one further undermining the king's claim to divine authority. If the king is truly a god, if he truly has the favor of heaven, why is he losing wars? The question hangs in the air, unspoken but increasingly present in people's minds. Religious divisions deepen. The transition from Hindu to Buddhist kingship, begun gradually over previous generations, creates confusion and resentment. The old ceremonies, the old rituals that have been performed for centuries, are being replaced or modified. New temples are built in the Buddhist style while old Hindu temples fall into disrepair. The change is not necessarily better or worse, but it is change, and change creates uncertainty. People cling to familiar traditions, suspicious of the new ways, fearful that the gods are being offended and will withdraw their protection from the kingdom. And then there is the environmental degradation, the long-term consequences of centuries of intensive agriculture and massive construction projects. The forests that once covered much of the region have been cut down for timber and to clear land for rice cultivation. Without the trees, the soil erodes more easily, washing into rivers and canals, filling them with silt. The carefully calibrated water system, designed for specific flow rates and volumes, no longer works as it should. Engineers try to compensate, trying to adapt the system to the changed conditions, but the problems are too widespread, the damage too extensive. The system that once seemed so permanent, so indestructible, reveals itself to be fragile, dependent on constant maintenance and a stable environment. When the final crisis comes, when the Thai army appears at the gates of Angkor, the city is already weakened, already in decline. The siege is merely the final blow, the event that makes undeniable what has been true for years. The age of Angkor is ending. The decision to abandon the city is made reluctantly, painfully, by a king and a court that understand they have no choice. To stay would be to be destroyed. To leave at least offers the possibility of survival, of rebuilding elsewhere, of preserving something of the Khmer state, even if its greatest city must be sacrificed. As you watch the royal procession leave Angkor, as you see the king and his courtiers and their possessions loaded onto boats and barges, as you see the army marching south toward the new capital, you feel a profound sense of loss. This city, these temples, have been the center of your world for your entire life and for generations before you. The idea that they will be abandoned, left to the jungle and to decay, is almost incomprehensible. But you also understand the necessity. Life will go on, elsewhere, in different forms. The Khmer people will survive, even if the Khmer Empire in its current form does not. This is the nature of history, of the rise and fall of civilizations. Nothing lasts forever. Everything changes. The only constant is change itself.